A field study on a number of hill country farms across Waikato and Bay of Plenty is measuring the impacts of deferred grazing on pasture quality. It's not a new idea, but this latest research will help farmers decide when and where to defer grazing to get the best result for a particular farming system.
Deferred grazing is the practice of locking some paddocks up so they're not being grazed between the end of spring and middle to the end of summer, so you're allowing the desirable pastured species to set and drop seed. It's actually a really old practice, but what we're doing now is learning more about how it impacts the pastures and the benefits of this practice, so we can give farmers some more confidence in when to shut the gate and when to open the gate and what to expect. So the sort of benefits they often look for and that they do it for are to rejuvenate pastures, because you get a lot of reseeding, but you also get the energy reserves building up in the plants that are there. So if you think of perennial ryegrass, for example, if it's not being grazed from late spring until midsummer when it sets seed, and it's the energy reserves, it's the leaves are like solar panels that's collecting the light, turning it into energy, and that's accumulating in all parts of the plant. As well, the roots are growing really deep, so you have more roots at depth. Then what happens in autumn, when you graze those pastures off quite hard to let the light into the base of the plant, is you get a lot more new tillers on the existing plants, and you also get a lot of seedlings coming. So that means it's like a pasture on steroids, and you get a lot more growth. As well, if you think of your farm as a piece of cake, you're looking up, say, up to 10 to 15% of it that's not being grazed, and you've got the same number of mouths to feed. On the rest of the farm, it means there's greater grazing pressure. So where often in late spring there might be, or early summer there might be a surplus on beef and sheep farms, they're going to be eating that surplus and keeping the pastures shorter, which means it's better quality, which improves the livestock performance and improves farm systems profitability. It's a really good tool for farmers that want to rejuvenate their pastures on steep hill country. What they can do is just lock up specific paddocks that they mightn't be able to get into with a tractor, into machinery, and they can allow the reseeding and the rejuvenation to occur.
They've eaten all the clover. They haven't started on the weeds yet, but they will, mark my words. And they don't look very hungry at the moment either. So there's about 1,200 sheep in here, and it's nearly a 3-hectare paddock. We shut up the paddock last year for silage, and when we came to cut it, it was just full of weeds, full of hedge mustard or wireweed and California thistles and willowweed. And so I talked to Catherine and talked about the timing of using it as deferred grazing paddock as opposed to making it into silage, and it would have been rubbish silage. And we went from there really, and the end result was that we were running 30% more sheep on this paddock than similar paddocks. We didn't have to spray it out, we didn't spray the weeds, we didn't have to put any nitrogen on it. It was low cost, so it was a win-win whichever way we looked at it.
We're really curious to see what's happening at depth between the deferred pastures and the conventionally grazed pastures. We've put these rhizotrons into existing pasture, so it's the first time we've been able to look at root growth over time in situ. So we can go down about 60 centimetres here. I have a 1 metre length clear polycarb tube that's inserted into the ground at a 45-degree angle, and we use a camera which is essentially a cylinder scanner, and it takes a 360-degree scan of the surrounding roots. So we are looking at root growth over time, and we're also looking at the differences between the treatments. We can see invertebrate activity, and we can see different root types. So we can see the broadleaf weeds, we can see the clover roots, and we can see the pasture grasses. We take dry matter cuts, so we use a known quadrat area, and so then I cut the pasture to ground level, and we take that, I take all the pasture away, take it back to the lab, and we take a subsample where we get a dry matter value for that, and we can work out the kgs of dry matter per hectare from that. We also take samples to look at botanical composition, and we take samples to look at nutritive value, which is metabolisable energy, is the main interest. So when do you think we're ready to graze this, Alan?
We've been using deferred grazing for a number of years. We were using it for like 5 years before we ever started doing any trials, and we found it really regenerated the paddock and grew more pasture during the winter months while keeping control of the rest of the farm, and we'd commonly take out 15 to 20% of the farm. We found that it was very good for putting lambs on at the end of the trial because it had very low parasite levels in it. Going forward, I'd see this as being a low-cost way of maintaining pasture quality and rejuvenating pasture.
We've been really privileged to work with Alan Costa in the Lower Kaimais now for quite a few years, where we've had a few different deferred grazing trials. So it's finishing country, quite gentle hill country, old perennial ryegrass-based pastures. There we've been comparing a number of different grazing management strategies, just standard rotational grazing with a deferred grazing. The kind of results we have seen consistently are increased pasture growth rates, sometimes increased clover depending on the year and on the pasture, sometimes a reduced weed abundance, not always, increased tiller populations, big one there, so you get more ground cover. What I really loved about this research is just the support that we've had. We've been learning so much from the farmers, and they've really fueled what we're doing and helped us to make sure that what we do has impact. No point in doing science that's not going to end up helping farmers and helping the quadruple bottom line.